Section 21. Seller breach and unrepresented sellers, customer or client, or no representation. That is the question. When the transaction does not go as planned. By this point in the course, we have talked about seller representation, buyer representation, dual agency, compensation, and the importance of having clear written agreements. Now we need to talk about what happens when the transaction does not go as planned. Not every escrow closes. Sometimes buyers cancel. Sometimes sellers change their minds. Sometimes a for sale by owner property enters the picture and creates a compensation question. These situations are where agents quickly learn why the right form, the right conversation, and the right timing matter. When a buyer breaches, most Arizona listing agreements include language addressing what happens if a buyer breaches the contract and forfeits earnest money. Historically, some listing agreements allowed the listing broker to claim a portion of forfeited earnest money, often up to the amount of the commission that would have been earned. However, buyer's agents should be careful not to assume they are automatically entitled to any portion of forfeited earnest money. The listing agreement is between the seller and the listing broker. The buyer's broker is generally not a party to that agreement and may not have the right to enforce its terms. Whether the listing broker claims any portion of forfeited earnest money is a business and legal decision between the seller, the listing broker, and the terms of their agreement. The full price offer myth. Another long-standing myth in real estate is that a seller must accept a full price offer if the offer matches the list price. That is not true. A list price is an invitation for buyers to submit offers. It is not an automatic obligation to accept any offer that arrives. A seller may receive a full price offer and still reject it, counter it, or accept another offer with different terms. Why? Because price is only one part of an offer. The seller may care about closing date, financing type, appraisal terms, inspection periods, seller concessions, possession, repair requests, or the strength of the buyer. A full price offer with weak terms may be less attractive than a slightly lower offer with stronger terms. The seller controls the decision. When a seller breaches, now let's look at the other side. What if the seller accepts an offer, escrow is moving forward, and then the seller suddenly refuses to close? Maybe the seller has remorse. Maybe they cannot find a replacement home. Maybe there has been an illness, family dispute, job loss, or unexpected personal issue. Whatever the reason, once the seller is under contract, refusing to close may create serious legal consequences. The buyer may seek return of earnest money. The buyer may pursue damages. In some cases, the buyer may seek specific performance, asking a court to force the seller to complete the sale. That process can be expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. The listing broker may also have rights under the listing agreement if the seller prevents the closing after the broker has produced a ready, willing, and able buyer under the terms of the agreement. However, collecting that commission may require legal action or settlement. Legal disputes are never fun. They are costly, they are emotional, and they often leave everyone frustrated. That is why brokers and agents should watch for red flags during escrow and communicate concerns early. A real-life lesson. Imagine a transaction is 3 days from closing. The buyer has completed inspections. The appraisal is done. Loan documents are almost ready. The moving truck is scheduled. Then the seller calls and says, "I changed my mind. I am not moving." The listing agent now has a problem. The buyer has a problem. The broker has a problem. The seller may believe they can simply cancel, but the contract does not disappear because someone no longer likes the decision they made. At this point, the agent should not give legal advice. The seller should be referred to legal counsel immediately. The broker should be notified. The buyer's agent should be informed according to contract requirements and broker direction. This is where professionalism matters. You are not the attorney. You are not the judge. You are the real estate professional responsible for recognizing the seriousness of the situation and making sure the right people are involved. Unrepresented sellers. Now let's turn to another common situation, the unrepresented seller. We used to hear the term FSBO all the time. Today, it is better practice to refer to that person as an unrepresented seller. That language is more accurate. The seller is not represented by a listing broker. They may still be willing to sell. They may even be willing to pay a buyer's broker, but they do not have an agent protecting their interests unless they hire one. The buyer wants to see an unrepresented seller's property. Imagine you are driving through a neighborhood with your buyer. You have already shown several MLS-listed properties. Then your buyer points to a sign in a yard and says, "What about that one?" It is an unrepresented seller. If you have a signed BBEEA with your buyer, this situation is manageable. You can explain to the buyer that you represent them, that the seller is unrepresented, and that if the seller is unwilling to pay your compensation, the buyer may be responsible under the terms of the BBEEA. That lets the buyer make an informed decision. They may still want to see it. They may decide to move forward. They may adjust their offer based on compensation. The important thing is that everyone understands the situation before time and emotion are invested. Without a signed BBEEA, you may find yourself in a difficult position. Do you show the property and risk not being paid? Do you skip it and risk failing to serve your buyer's interests? That is why the buyer agreement matters. It gives the buyer clarity, it gives you protection, and it allows the decision to be made honestly before the property is shown. The unrepresented seller compensation conversation. If the seller is willing to pay compensation, the agreement should be documented in writing before the showing or before the offer is submitted, depending on the situation and your broker's policy. The key is to make sure the seller understands that you represent the buyer, not the seller. The seller may remain unrepresented. The seller may choose to hire their own broker. The seller may agree to pay your brokerage, even though you represent only the buyer. Those relationships must be clearly explained and documented. Exclusive agency listings. Another seller representation issue involves exclusive agency listings. Under an exclusive agency agreement, the seller may retain the right to sell the property themselves without owing a commission, depending on the terms of the agreement. That can create confusion. Some brokers avoid exclusive agency listings altogether because the seller may believe they can continue marketing the property independently while also expecting the broker to provide full service. If your broker allows exclusive agency listings, make sure the seller understands exactly what services you will provide, when compensation is owed, and what happens if the seller finds their own buyer. If the seller expects you to prepare documents, negotiate terms, coordinate escrow, and provide professional services after they found the buyer themselves, then compensation for those services should be discussed and documented. You have value. Do not let a seller treat professional representation as free paperwork assistance. The reality of selling without representation. Some unrepresented sellers believe they will automatically make more money because they are not paying a listing broker. Sometimes that may be true, but often the story is more complicated. Unrepresented sellers may have less exposure. They may attract bargain hunting buyers. They may struggle with pricing. They may not understand disclosure obligations. They may not know how to handle inspection disputes, appraisal issues, financing timelines, or contract deadlines. They may also create safety concerns by opening their home to strangers without the screening that often occurs when a buyer is working with a professional agent. When speaking with an unrepresented seller, your role depends on who you represent. If you represent the buyer, do not drift into advising the seller. Be honest, be fair, but stay clear about your role. Broker tip. When working with an unrepresented seller, repeat your role more than once. I represent the buyer, not you, should be clearly stated, documented, and reinforced throughout the transaction. Confusion about representation often leads to complaints. Online discussion question. Why is a seller not required to accept a full price offer? Answer. Because price is only one part of an offer. The seller may consider financing, contingencies, closing date, concessions, possession, and other terms before deciding whether to accept, reject, or counter. Question. Why is a BBEEA especially important when a buyer wants to view an unrepresented seller's property? Answer. Because the seller may refuse to pay the buyer's broker. A signed BBEEA helps the buyer understand their potential responsibility for compensation and allows them to make an informed decision. Question. Why should an agent avoid giving legal advice when a seller refuses to close? A seller breach can create serious legal consequences, including possible damages or specific performance. The agent should notify the broker and recommend legal counsel rather than offering legal advice.